It was supposed to be just another ordinary rescue, an ordinary day at work. I've been a firefighter for years, and rescues from landslides are part of the routine. When we received the call, a residential building had collapsed, and several people were trapped under the rubble. The teams were preparing for the mission, and I had no idea what was to come. When we finally reached her, I saw the elderly woman for the first time. She was unconscious, almost motionless, her eyes closed. Her face was covered in dust and dirt, but there was something there, something that didn't quite fit. She seemed strangely calm, almost serene amidst the chaos. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. As we pulled her from the rubble, something caught my attention. She didn't react, didn't move, and didn't show any pain, as expected. Normally, people trapped in this kind of situation are panicked or at least show some kind of reaction. But not her. She just stared at us blankly. Her eyes were fixed on something, but no one knew what. Her expression, her enigmatic gaze, disconcerted me. It wasn't one of relief, as I'd expect from someone being rescued. It was as if she knew something we didn't. She seemed to be in a trance, as if she were aware of something much greater but chose not to tell us. But what made me truly uneasy was the small smile she gave as soon as we pulled her from the rubble. Not a smile of relief, but a subtle smile, as if it were a message, a last attempt to hide something. Something much deeper. "Don't talk about what you saw," she whispered to me, almost imperceptibly, but I heard it clearly. "Don't tell anyone." Her words resonated with me. Why was she so desperate to hide something? What was she trying to protect, and why did it seem like she knew something terrible was about to be revealed? At that moment, I knew this story wouldn't be like the others. This woman was hiding a secret, and that secret was about to change everything. And I, unbeknownst to myself, was about to become involved in something much bigger, something I wasn't prepared to face. The day seemed normal, but little did I know it would turn into an experience I would never forget. After saving the elderly woman, I thought it was all over. I thought she was out of danger, but her behavior continued to be strange. She was taken to the hospital, and I returned to my routine, hoping the tragedy would be just a closed chapter, but as time passed, something bothered me more and more. What she had said to me, her enigmatic words, they wouldn't leave my mind. At that moment, I didn't know it, but everything was about to change. The secret she was keeping wasn't just hers. It was something connected to the city, to the building that collapsed, something that was about to be revealed, and that I was closer to discovering than I imagined. Over the next few days, the city began to recover from the collapse. Everyone was trying to move on, but some things didn't make sense. Investigations indicated that the building had collapsed due to structural causes, but no one knew what had actually happened. Authorities focused on clearing the rubble, while on the streets, the feeling that something was wrong grew with each passing moment. But it was at the hospital, during the visit to the elderly woman, that the real tension began to set in. When I entered her room, the doctor seemed uncomfortable. She wasn't showing the typical signs of shock seen in someone who had undergone such a difficult rescue. She was too calm. That mysterious smile was still on her lips, and her eyes, despite their tiredness, seemed to be hiding something, as if she were harboring a deep secret. She didn't say much, but her gestures and her looks were like a smokescreen that prevented me from understanding what was happening. At one point, the doctor told me that the elderly woman was asking to be released early, that she didn't want to stay in the hospital. But what made me even more curious was her request. She didn't want to be seen by anyone, didn't want anyone to know she was there. Why was she behaving like this? What was she afraid of? Something I couldn't understand. It was as if she knew something that could change everything, something that was happening and no one else was seeing. At that moment, I decided I couldn't let this go. I had to understand what she was trying to hide. And although I knew I was invading her privacy, the sense of urgency overcame my fear. I needed to understand what was happening. Something wasn't right. That's when everything started to come together. The hospital papers, the medical records. I found something that didn't make sense. The elderly woman wasn't just in the building when the collapse happened. She was connected to it in a much deeper way. But what exactly was she doing in that building? And why was she so desperate for no one to know her true story? The answer was there, right before my eyes, but I still couldn't see it. And what happened next left me speechless. Over the next few days, a sense of unease began to creep over me. Something in my mind was compelling me to continue the investigation, to dig deeper, even though I knew I shouldn't. But as the small details began to fall into place, as the answers began to emerge, I could no longer ignore it. The elderly woman wasn't just a victim. She had a direct connection to the collapse, a connection no one else had noticed. I decided to return to the site of the collapse, even though I knew it could be risky. The authorities had restricted the area, but my curiosity overcame any warning. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I felt that, somehow, the place was calling me. With each step I took through the rubble, the weight of the situation grew. Every piece of concrete, every twisted piece of iron seemed to watch me, as if hiding a deep secret. That's when I found something that made my heart stop, an old, partially destroyed note, stuck among the rubble. The paper was stained, but the words were still legible. I looked at the note and felt a chill run down my spine. It was addressed to someone. Someone I already knew, the elderly woman. The note spoke of something that seemed to be related to an ancient secret, something that had been kept secret for generations. The word secret repeated throughout the note, as if trying to alert me to something much bigger than I could imagine. And that's when I began to understand. The collapse wasn't an accident. It had been planned. At first, the idea that the disaster had been orchestrated seemed absurd, but the note had given me a clue. The old woman knew about it. She was at the center of it all, but what exactly did she know, and what was she trying to hide? Why was the note there, amid the rubble, like a key to a secret that, until then, no one had guessed? I couldn't just ignore it. I had to understand more. Every time I tried to push the thought away, something would pull me back. So I decided to do something risky, return to her house. I knew the old woman had something to tell me, something she hadn't yet revealed. When I arrived at her house, I noticed the door was ajar. It didn't feel right. The lights were off, and the silence in the air was thick, charged with an inexplicable tension. I pushed the door open and walked in. The musty smell was strong, and the place was in complete disarray, as if someone had rummaged through it. But what shocked me was what I found on the table, an old, worn book, with strange symbols written in a language I didn't recognize. That book wasn't there by chance. The old woman had left it behind. And when I opened the book, I realized it spoke of secret rituals. Rituals involving people, places, and, somehow, the city itself. I didn't know how, but everything was beginning to connect. The collapse, the note, the old woman, and the book. Everything indicated that the story was far from what I'd imagined. She wasn't a victim. She was a key to something much darker, much more dangerous than I was prepared to handle. And it was at that moment that everything became clear to me. The collapse was no accident. It was no ordinary tragedy. Something bigger was happening, something that was being carefully hidden. And I, now, was at the center of it all. As the investigation deepened, a sense of dread and distrust took hold of me. The book I found in the old woman's house, with its strange rituals and symbols, wasn't just a piece of a puzzle. It was the key to something bigger, something much closer than I could have imagined. I knew something was being carefully hidden, but now obstacles began to appear, obstacles that prevented me from moving forward. The first obstacle came in the form of threats. Anonymous, as always, but with a clarity that made me realize how serious the situation had become. My discoveries weren't pleasing the right people. I began receiving mysterious phone calls, handwritten messages left on my door. The words were clear: "Stop looking. You won't like what you find." It was as if my every move was being watched. I knew I should stay away from this investigation, that the risk to my life was real, but something inside me compelled me to continue. I couldn't stop. The old woman's story was consuming me, and, unintentionally, I found myself increasingly drawn into this search. The pressure mounted as I began to hear rumors about her. People in town began to say that the elderly woman was not just a victim of the collapse, but that she had been involved with secret circles, perhaps the cult mentioned in the book. How could someone so elderly, seemingly frail, be involved with something so dark? I didn't know for sure, but there was no more time for doubt. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. With every step I took, more doors closed. The police were starting to get involved, but not with the same urgency I had. They thought the collapse was a tragedy, and that was it. But something told me this was just the tip of the iceberg. I began to realize that the entire city was being implicated, and no one knew it. We were being manipulated by forces far beyond my comprehension. It was then that something very strange happened. One night, while I was reviewing the records of the collapse, an unexpected visitor arrived at my door. It was the old woman herself back. But she wasn't the same woman. Her gaze was more penetrating, more focused. She didn't seem weakened by the experience of the collapse. On the contrary, she seemed stronger, as if she had shaken off something. She entered without asking permission and said in a grave tone, "I knew you would come back. See, you can't run away from this. There's no turning back from what's happening here. But if you want to know, I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything." At that moment, my heart raced. I was about to discover something, a truth no one could have imagined. But I knew this revelation would bring even more danger. Something inside me told me the path was about to become much more perilous, and that I could lose everything in the process. The old woman began to tell a story I never would have imagined. She spoke of ancient rituals, of a silent pact that had existed for generations, something linked to the founding of the city. With each word she spoke, the mystery deepened, and the feeling that I was about to step into something much greater consumed me. But there was no turning back. The city, the old woman, and I, we were all intertwined in a story that would be revealed, and nothing could stop it. What the elderly woman told me that night was far more than I could process. Her words reverberated in my mind like a distant, terrifying echo. Each sentence seemed to pull me deeper into an abyss of mysteries and hidden secrets. I knew that if I believed her, everything I had known until that moment would change forever. And I was unprepared for what came next. She told me about a city built on a secret that stretches back to its founding. The city was founded by people who wielded power beyond comprehension, she said, her expression grim. They made a pact, an agreement with forces beyond our reality. But the pact would not last forever. And now, the effects of that pact are beginning to take their toll. I tried to comprehend what she was telling me, but it seemed like an unsolvable riddle. How could an entire city have been built on such a dark secret? And, more importantly, what did it have to do with her? Why was she involved in this? Her answer was even more chilling. "I was chosen," she said, her voice trembling. "Chosen to carry the secret. But I didn't know it. When the cave-in happened, something was released. Something I've been waiting for. I didn't want you to find out, but it's too late." It was then that she handed me an old, crumpled piece of paper, covered in symbols I'd seen before, in the book I'd found at her house. I stared at her, stunned, as she spoke softly, almost in a whisper, "The collapse wasn't accidental. It was just the beginning. What you're seeking now will lead you to a power no one should awaken. You must understand this, or it will be too late for all of us." The note contained more information, but the words were in an ancient language, one I couldn't decipher. But what frightened me most was the feeling that this revelation wasn't something that could be easily ignored. This woman wasn't just a victim of a disaster. She was connected to something much larger, something that was about to break loose. And when she finished speaking, a wave of panic washed over me. I knew she was telling the truth. What I had learned so far wasn't just about a cave-in or a city secret. It was about a lost power, something buried deep in the city's foundations, now about to be unleashed. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. The collapse was just a trigger, a key element in something even more devastating. And I, unknowingly, had been pulled into the center of this mystery. The truth was closer than ever, and from that moment on, nothing would be the same again. The old woman's revelation left me speechless. I didn't know who to trust, but the information she gave me was aligning in a way that was impossible to ignore. The city, the collapse, the ancient pact, everything was intertwined in such a complex and dangerous way that I knew there was no turning back. The scariest thing was realizing that the key to what was happening was in my hands. The note, the book, the old woman's secret, everything was leading me in one direction. But I didn't know what to find. What else could I discover? And most importantly, what was about to be unlocked? I decided to press on. I couldn't let the mystery unfold without seeking answers. But with each step, things became more sinister. What I already knew was now haunting me, and the threats became more explicit. I began to delve deeper into the city's history and its founders. And as more information emerged, I realized things weren't as simple as I'd thought. The city's foundations, the site of the collapse, all connected to the same occult cult, a sect that had long since disappeared from official history. What I was searching for wasn't just an ancient secret, it was a hidden power that had been imprisoned and was now trying to break free. With the pieces of the puzzle beginning to come together, I made my way to the city's ancient cathedral. Long abandoned, but still with its imposing gates and walls steeped in mystery. I knew there was something there. Something that connected me to the final answer. When I entered the cathedral, the atmosphere was charged, dense, as if the building itself were waiting for something. I wandered through the dark corridors until I found what I was looking for, a hidden altar tucked away deep within the cathedral. There, I found more symbols and inscriptions, the same ones found in the old woman's book and the note she gave me. And then the final piece fell into place. The cathedral wasn't just a place of worship. It was the focal point of an ancient ritual, where the power of the ancestral pact was sealed. This wasn't just a cult, it was a pact with forces beyond our comprehension. The collapse, the old woman, the book, all of this was part of the process of unleashing this power. And I was at the center of it all. But the worst was yet to come. As I tried to comprehend what I had discovered, I heard footsteps behind me. The cathedral door closed abruptly. A figure appeared in the darkness, someone I hadn't expected to see. It was the police officer responsible for investigating the collapse, but his gaze was empty, lifeless, as if he were merely a puppet of whatever was behind it all. "You should have stopped, but it's too late now," he said, his tone icy. "The power you're trying to stop is already awakening, and nothing can stop it now." I didn't know what he meant by that, but the fear I felt was immediate. Whatever this power was, it was closer to being unleashed than ever before. And I knew there was no escape. The air in the cathedral was thick, as if the building itself were alive, pulsing with a dark energy. I knew I was on the verge of discovering something that could destroy everything, not just the city, but reality itself as we know it. The figure that appeared in the doorway, the police officer who now seemed more like a shadow, regarded me with a sinister smile, as if he knew something I couldn't yet grasp. "Do you have any idea what's going on here?" he asked, his voice cold and full of contempt. "It's not about the collapse. It never was." I tried to process his words, but the confusion overcame my comprehension. He was referring to something much deeper, much older. It was as if the collapse were merely a distraction, an event orchestrated to release something trapped deep within the city. But the truth was beginning to form in my mind, like a distorted image that gradually gained clarity. The cult, the old woman, the book, the symbols, it all made sense now. They weren't just trying to revive a hidden power, they were trying to open a portal to another dimension, a dimension where what we call reality no longer existed. The officer continued, as if reading my thoughts, his words coming with the precision of someone who had already been consumed by it. What you're looking for isn't a secret. It's a power. And you're about to unleash it. We can't stop it, not now. It was at that moment that the ground beneath us began to shake, a deep, distant rumble that seemed to come from within the earth. The inscriptions on the cathedral began to glow with an eerie light, a red glow that illuminated everything around. The air was charged with static electricity, and I felt the pressure build, as if the universe itself were compressing, ready to explode. The feeling was overwhelming. Something was about to happen, and I had no way to stop it. The power was being unleashed. The cathedral, built over the city, was the key to it. The ritual had begun, and I was at the center of it. The police officer took a step toward me, his eyes now completely empty, devoid of humanity. You don't understand. You can't stop what has been started. The power that is coming will consume everything. It will consume you too. But before I could respond, the earth beneath my feet began to crack. The sound of concrete shattering echoed throughout the cathedral, and a viscous, hot energy began to emerge from the ground, spreading throughout the room, as if the earth itself were vomiting something indescribable. It was then that the great revelation happened. The old woman, whom I had thought was defenseless, whom I had thought was just a victim, appeared at the cathedral entrance. But it wasn't the same old woman. She was different, younger, stronger. Her gaze was now filled with inhuman power. "I warned you," she said, her voice now deep and full of authority. "I'm not a victim. I'm part of the pact. And you were the key to it all." What happened next was an explosion of light and sound. The power the old woman had unleashed spread throughout the cathedral, and I suddenly realized she had been in control all along. She had manipulated each of us, guiding every movement with precision. The collapse, the note, the book, the messages, all were part of a much larger plan, something I, in my naivete, could never have comprehended. And the moment the cathedral's energy took shape, I understood that the city's fate was sealed. The power being unleashed could no longer be contained. Whatever the old woman had been trying to hide was now in plain sight. But the worst part was knowing that I could no longer do anything. The explosion of light and sound that filled the cathedral was so intense that, for a moment, I lost consciousness. Fear and confusion were at a height I could never have imagined. I was at the center of something far greater than I could control, something spreading like a wave, engulfing the city and perhaps the world. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. When I awoke, I was lying on the cathedral floor, with the old woman, or what was left of her, before me. She now seemed almost divine, her eyes illuminated by an otherworldly light. The power she had unleashed was in her hands. She was no longer the frail old woman I had encountered in the rubble. She was an entity, connected to something far greater than anyone could comprehend. "You still don't understand, do you?" She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of relief. It was a smile of victory, as if she had completed a mission no one could stop. And suddenly, something strange happened. The cathedral began to disintegrate, its walls crumbling into a dust that seemed to be consumed by an invisible force. The power it unleashed was spreading rapidly, not just through the cathedral, but throughout the city. I felt the ground tremble, the air charged with a palpable energy. Reality was distorting around us. But as all this was happening, a sense of clarity washed over me. I knew I couldn't let this take over. Something inside me, something I hadn't known existed, began to manifest. Maybe it was the energy of the place itself, maybe it was the power of truth finally being revealed, but in that moment I realized something profound. Everything that had happened, every step I'd taken, was part of a journey, and now I had to choose. The old woman, or what was left of her, was about to complete the ritual, But the fate of the city, of the world, lay in my hands. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to stop her from finishing what she started. With a final effort, I stood up. Everything around me seemed to be transforming. The air was thicker, the ground more unstable. The entire city seemed to be engulfed by a growing energy. And it was there, at the height of the destruction, that I understood that, deep down, saving the city, saving the people, wasn't just about fighting evil. It was about protecting humanity from something greater that could not be contained. Because, in the end, saving a life is saving an entire world. I didn't know if I could stop it. The power she had unleashed was immense. But I knew one thing: the battle wasn't over yet. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all was understanding that what we do, what we choose, can change not only our fate, but that of everyone around us. The city's secret was revealed. What would happen next depended on all of us. I had chosen not to give up. And however uncertain the future might be, I knew I had made the right choice.